Okay, should we kick it off? Welcome everybody to our monthly insight session for October. Thank you all for joining. We're going to get right into it. Today we're talking about measuring Facebook, specifically using Geo Match-Market testing. Really excited for this content to share with you guys. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely go check out our webinar from our last session. We did a much deeper dive on Geo Match-Market testing specifically, a lot of great insights there, but we will cover some of that today as well. We ask that if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. There should be a button at the bottom of your Zoom menu, and we are going to get to all the questions at the end. I think last time we had about 40 or 50 questions, and we want to make sure that we save enough time to get to all those. So we're going to kind of cruise through our content today, and we'll kick it off right now. So first, I'll just introduce our speakers. Today, I've got Ranjith from our product team. He is the lead on all of our Facebook experimentation products. Thanks for joining, Ranjith. How are you?
Hello, everybody.
Ranjith, thanks for joining. I know it's really late your time. I think, what is it, midnight there?
Yeah, 30 minutes midnight, yeah.
Appreciate it. And we have Terrence. Hey, Terrence. Terrence is director on our customer success team, helping our clients design experiments and analyze them and uncover the insights they use to make their business decisions. Thanks for joining, Terrence.
Yep. Nice to see you guys.
All right, let's get right into it. Quick overview of our agenda today. We'll talk briefly about building a culture of experimentation in your brand. We'll talk about the platform measurement challenge and specifically as it relates to Facebook. And we will then do a quick refresh on what is incrementality and geo-testing. We will have a really great demo from Ranjith. He's going to walk you through a real platform reporting example from a Facebook experiment. And then we're going to walk through a few example case studies of how brand marketers are using experimentation to better inform their platform budget allocation and marketing decisions. And at the end, hopefully we should have around 20 minutes for Q&A. So we look forward to that. First, just to start everybody off with a concept that we take near and dear to our hearts and that we find is true for a lot of the brands we see making really big moves in market who are finding a lot of success. It's that the confidence to make bold decisions is the superpower of today's D2C marketers. Having the information you need to make those big decisions that sometimes may question even your most common practices ends up being a hallmark of the brands that we see finding the most success in their marketing spend in market. And let's just dive a little deeper on that here. Harvard Business Review actually found that brands who run at least 15 experiments in a given year tend to see about a 30% higher ad performance in that same year. And oftentimes we'll see up to 45% increase in performance the following year. So how can you bring this test and learn culture into your brand? Don't be afraid to question the standard business practices that you may, take as religion. It's really important to always be questioning your own business practices. Additionally, track your team's business questions and prioritize them together. Take hold and take note of what questions come to mind in your daily and weekly rituals and start building hypotheses to try to uncover how you could possibly test to answer those particular questions. We'll go through a few examples today that highlight some of these business questions and how they're turned into hypotheses. Additionally, and this is probably the most important one, reframing the concept of investing in experiments, not as risk, but as opportunity to uncover insights. With good experimentation, obviously, in a lot of cases, there will be situations where you have to divert a certain percentage of spend or hold out a certain segment of the market in order to create a testing control environment. But given the big upside that we see for brands who do experimentation, we like to think of this truly as insight opportunity that you're buying, not necessarily risk dollars that you're putting at risk, especially when you consider some of the significance of the results that our brands tend to find when running these experiments. So Terrence, I'm going to kick it over to you for a second. Can you just highlight really briefly when we say the Facebook challenge or the platform measurement challenge, what's going on in the world today around privacy and regulations and how we measure these platforms?
Sure. So I think these will all be common issues that everyone on this call have probably faced, and that's probably a big reason why you're all here. Obviously, with the release of the new Apple iOS this year, a lot of marketing platforms, not just Facebook, were directly impacted by the changes. They fall into a couple categories, which is kind of important, and we'll probably touch on exactly why later. But obviously, the first big problem is the opt-out issue. There is now a blind spot inherent in Facebook and indeed all social platforms where folks that haven't agreed to share their data with the platform can't be tracked. So that's one problem that we don't really want to punish, let's say, a Facebook or any other vendor for, because they might still be driving sales among these folks. Those sales are still real. Your marketing's still working there. You just can't see it on platform. Now, there's a separate issue where Facebook or another social platform or any other platform might lose the ability to optimize or might lose some power in their algorithms or how they're serving ads because of iOS changes. Now, those are real and those are actually impacting your ad performance. So we also want to account for that. The second kind of bucket here is the second bullet, which is attribution windows. Obviously, the ability to look at longer purchase cycles, like a 28-day view through window, for example, has been cut out as a result of iOS. That has pretty much rendered old split test capabilities, such as PSA testing or stuff like that, not really useful. You have to have a longer window to be able to measure that type of stuff. So essentially all the brands we work with are trying to figure out a way to work around this, and kind of relying on last touch or site analytics is not the way to do it. Those metrics or those platforms are inherently biased. They definitely overvalue things that are lower funnel and undervalue things that are upper funnel, like Facebook prospecting. And later we'll talk through some specifics there as well.
Great. Thanks, Terrence. Ranjit, anything to add there?
Okay, good.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so I think we're going to do a quick poll question for those in the audience. Hopefully this can inform a little bit of the discussion that we have coming up. And you should see that pop up on your screen shortly. There it is. So the question is, how much trust do you put in your Facebook reporting metrics today? Would you say they're not trustworthy, somewhat trustworthy, or very trustworthy? And we'll give everybody maybe 20 seconds to punch their vote in. All right. Lots of voting happening. Let's see what happens. All right. Right in the middle there. Somewhat trustworthy. Okay. So whether that means you trust it sometimes and not other times, or you're always a little bit skeptical, with 0% putting very trustworthy, I think that speaks to the need to either independently verify or find new ways to calibrate your measurement of those specific platforms. Great. Thanks everybody for participating there. So quick recap before we get into some of the demo and examples. What is incrementality? Some of the folks on this call may be very familiar with it already, but essentially incrementality is our ability to measure the true contribution of your preferred business outcome. So while any given platform, in this example, Facebook, may be reporting a last touch contribution of X amount, through experimentation that is tied to your particular source of truth transaction data, whether that be orders or sales or site visits or whatever particular data source, by using test and control methodology, we can highlight, hey, there was actually a huge percentage of those reported that actually would have converted anyway. And you'll see some examples of this later when we talk about the high intent baked into retargeting campaigns, for example, where you're targeting users who already have a high propensity to convert, in which case, while in that platform, they're able to say, yes, we were a part of that transaction. We're actually able to identify, in the absence of media, would that person have converted anyway, in effect showing the true contribution of the media. Terrence or Ranjit, any other comments there?
Nope.
Cool. So now we're going to get into the geo-testing element. Again, we did a webinar a while back that dives very deep into geo-testing and does a deep dive demo on that, but we want to just do a quick recap. Why is geo-testing so important and so valuable for D2C brands today? First and foremost, it enables you to test against your source of truth transaction data in a given geography. This is really important because it frees us from the reality of needing to base our measurement on the tracking of a particular user. Instead, we're able to use the levers of deploying or withholding media in a particular geography and then tracking the transactions or whatever other conversion you'd like to use to measure from that geography to determine the impact of the media. Additionally, through the process by which we create these different cells or geography cells or test zones, we can test multiple business questions with a single test. So within each state, as you can see in the image here, you can actually test different channels or different tactics because all of those states are predicted to represent your national kind of performance. And lastly, it's just really good for testing those hard to measure channels, enables us to do this at different levels of granularity. So in this example, it might be states, but whether it be DMA state or zip level, having that flexibility to align the test to your particular business needs or the volume of transactions you may have is really important. So it's a super flexible and powerful testing capability that enables us to test a variety of different platforms and channels. Terrence, do you want to walk through just a brief example of what a geotest result might look like and how we can interpret this?
Sure. So we'll go really high level here, just what this concept actually means and why it works. So taking this chart on the right, let's pretend that this blue line is kind of your national sales over time. I would call it BAU, business as usual. This is what your business normally does over time without you monkeying around with media. And then let's say we take out 5 states, consider that the red line, that highly correlate with the national sales, meaning that if we know what happens in the business as usual or the national kind of the national overall, we can easily predict what would have happened in those 5 states had we done nothing, had we done no treatment or changed nothing about media. Now, if we take out, let's say we take out Facebook prospecting from those 5 states, and you can see this test start line here, that's where we take it out. That orange dotted line is what we predict what would have happened if we had not done that. If we had done nothing to touch these states, what would sales likely have been? And we know that because we have the national sales from that time period. That is the blue line. If we have that blue line, we can predict the dotted line. Now, of course, we did do something to those states. We took out Facebook. And as expected, we'll see overall sales go down a little bit in those 5 states compared to what we would have expected. The difference between those 2 lines is essentially the contribution of Facebook prospecting. We don't change anything else except for taking out Facebook prospecting from those 5 states. That gap or that area between those 2 lines is the real contribution. And that is agnostic of any platform tracking, of any site tracking, of anything else. That is using your source of truth transaction data, and that is the real read.
Awesome. Thanks, Terrence. That was great. We'll do another quick poll question. Keep everybody, keep this interactive. See it pop up on your screen. Okay. How many marketing experiments has your brand run in the last 6 months? And we'll give everybody about 15 seconds here. I can see the votes starting to pile up. We're gonna have to license the Jeopardy music or something for these. Great, we've got some results. Awesome. So 13% said 0, 24% said 1 to 2, 24% said 3 to 5, and 40% said more than 5. So I think experimentation is definitely a part of the repertoire of a lot of marketers today. So that's great. Awesome feedback. Thank you. Okay, we'll jump right on ahead. And we do see a couple questions coming in. We will get to those at the end of the session for sure. Okay, so Ranjit, do you want to give a brief explanation of how we use geotesting as a part of our overall approach to measuring Facebook in the post-iOS 14.5 world?
Absolutely. So the Facebook experiment that we're running is a 2-test framework. The first one is a Geo Match-Market experiment that Terrence covered earlier. So on Facebook, for every Facebook tactic, we will do Geo Match-Marketing experiment to measure the true contribution of Facebook advertising on that. Then the second test is anchored on Facebook split test API, which creates 2 cohorts, mutually exclusive cohorts, where all the ad sets that you have in your ad account will be part of the test cohort, and a corresponding control ad set will be created. For each ad set, there will be corresponding control created with mimicking the same audience targeting, but will change the creative to keep an anchor creative. Then after running the experiment, we look at the results, the performance of the test against the control, and the difference in the performance is the relative performance that we get. For all the ad sets, you will get the relative performance, and you have the tactic level incrementality from the geo testing available. We'll use that to calibrate the ad set level incrementality to find the ad set level, ad set level relative test and get the ad set level incrementality values. That's the two-test framework.
Perfect. So just to reiterate a little bit of what you said there, we have our ad set relative split using Facebook split testing API to run comparative performance tests of particular tactics or campaigns within Facebook, or ad set, in this case, ad set level comparisons. And then we're calibrating that with the results from our geo test, which are giving us a benchmark or a framework for how incremental Facebook actually is in market using that geo test. Great. You give a slightly more detailed view here of what these splits tend to look like. These numbers are not always the same. Sometimes they change depending on the the investment opportunity or risk profile of the particular client, and making sure that we have this test and control breakout is important. And you can see here we have the anchor creative highlighted under the control as the ad set relative split test. This is the branded creative. And in this case, actually, you're not actually losing any investment in this particular test, because you're still using a branded creative to draw the comparisons between those ad sets. We're just calibrating that further with the active in-market geo test. Great. Cruising right along here. Ranjit, do you want to give us a brief overview of, what brands should be looking for, or how they can think of themselves? Are they a good fit for these types of testing frameworks?
Sure. So any brands that have a spend of $10,000 or above is a good fit for this experiment. And typically with the consideration cycle of 30 days or less, so that we can, measure the impact of that using a geo experiment, which runs for 30 days. So that will be an ideal candidate. And the brands with a lot of conversion values, conversion numbers, as opposed to big value conversions and low number of conversions. So the former one will be the ideal candidate for the testing. And if your goal of testing is to measure lower funnel conversions or some mid funnel engagement activities, that will be a good fit for the Facebook incrementality testing.
Great. So though it may seem obvious to some, but maybe not to others, if you are, for example, an auto company with a really long sales cycle, possibly up to several months, and it's you don't have a high volume of transactions, but you have a very high value transaction, it may be a little harder in a geo test environment to draw conclusive, statistically significant results versus a brand that may have a kind of a higher volume of conversions at a lower value that tend to happen more frequently, so you can more effectively measure that in market. Does that make sense? Great. Terrence, do you want to briefly highlight, just to get people's wheels turning a little bit, some example use cases of how people can think about starting to form those business questions and the hypotheses they want to test using these types of frameworks?
For sure. So this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all framework. We have a lot of different brands and different kind of stages of their life cycle, a lot of different categories, a lot of different industries, different strategies and stuff like that. So the most common one would be this top one. So like, we want to know what Facebook is driving, so we know what to target on platform and how to actually optimize campaigns. That's simple enough. But maybe you don't care as much about actually hitting a target goal or a ROAS or profit break even. Maybe you're a brand new company, launch company that just wants to grow as fast as humanly possible. There are a lot of other use cases for this. Like, for example, you can use geo testing to test scale in certain tactics. Let's say, oh, what would happen if we, triple our Facebook budget? It's a pretty big risk to take to just do that and see what happens. But we can carve out 5 states and triple the penetration in just those 5 states and see how that compares to the rest of BAU. That would give you confidence to scale into that tactic or not before you actually go ahead and do it nationwide. And then, another kind of flip side example to that would be a very established company with very high brand awareness, not very high growth, but they're just trying to get the most out of the marketing dollars they're already putting in market. That would be finding efficiencies between different ad sets on Facebook, for example, which Ranjit will show an example of. But really, this framework and this method can be used for all three equally effectively.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Those are some great examples. And again, we're going to get more specific on some examples after the demo. Few key takeaways before we jump into the demo. Always be testing. This is something that we live and breathe it every day, and we do see the results here. These are kind of continuous efforts that we find brands are able to really leapfrog learnings when they continue to experiment, and even continue to experiment on the things they've experimented on previously. One of the examples you'll see in a minute really talks about how deeper experimentation, as you go deeper and deeper, can really uncover some unique granular insights and huge opportunities for optimization. Additionally, supplement your platform reporting with independent measurement. In one way or another, depending on how you're calibrating it, you will likely continue to find that individual platforms don't necessarily have the entire picture. So while they're reporting in their own world of in their walled garden is probably accurate for what they're able to see, it is not getting the complete picture of your media, your customer, and what's happening in your market. So ensuring that you are at least validating that with some other independent measurement that's able to look across more than one particular platform is really important. And lastly, and probably the most important one, is that your measurement must be tied to your source of truth, transaction or conversion data. So you must be analyzing your results based on the true source of your particular business outcomes. So you'll often find that platform reporting of likely conversions caused by a particular ad set or tactic don't tend to match up exactly to what you see in your Shopify or in your e-commerce platform or on your website traffic management tool. So it's really important that you're actually measuring based on those specific outcomes. Cool. So I think we're going to jump into a demo right now. Oh, we have actually another poll question before we do that. Sorry, Ranjit. False start. All right. One more poll question for everybody. How does your brand typically measure Facebook performance? Are you using MTA, a particular MTA vendor, or Adobe or GA? Are you doing site analytics, platform reporting, media mix modeling? Other could include a combination of those three or those four. But I think generally pick if anyone is most prominent in your particular use. And platform reporting being from the platform itself. And we'll see the results pop up here. Okay, so platform reporting up with 36%, trickling down to site analytics and down to MTA, still pretty popular, MMM. Great, we probably should have had incrementality as another option here to see how many people were measuring that way. I'm assuming a lot of that falls into the other category. And I think a lot of brands are probably using a blend or informing certain types of models with some of this other data. So great, thanks for contributing to that poll, everybody. All right, Ranjit, let's do a demo. I'm going to stop sharing and then you can steal it away.
Sure. All right, I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
All right, so we have done a two-test framework of the Geo Match-Market experiment in conjunction with the Facebook split test API-based split testing together for a brand that we work with. So for the duration that I have selected here, the insight that we can see is the overall incremental contribution of Facebook to their business is at 30.31%. What it means is if you stop spending on Facebook ads, this business is going to lose 30.31% of their overall business. What's also interesting is the overall incrementality numbers that you can see here. The incrementality number is above 100%. So we all know that there are limitations on the platform reported data because of the shortened attribution window and the restrictions on tracking. So when you do a geo experiment and measure the impact of your experiment on your source of truth data, you can measure beyond, you can get insights beyond what is reported on Facebook, right? So in this example, what you're seeing is the Facebook platform itself is, contributing more than what Facebook, so the Facebook advertising is contributing more than what the Facebook platform is reporting, right? Let's slice this data. Let's get into some details. I'm going to select Facebook prospecting. So a major portion of the Facebook revenue is coming from Facebook prospecting tactics for this brand. It's at 26.92%. And what is really interesting is the incrementality number that you see here. It's really high at 136%. What does that mean? It means that based on your Facebook reported, platform reported number, the last touch CPO, the cost for one conversion is $15.92. But based on the incrementality testing, what it unveils is you'll only spend $11.69 for a transaction, right? That's the insight here.
Interesting. So Ranjit, in this case, and would you say it's typical for prospecting, but it seems that Facebook is pretty significantly undercounting or underreporting their performance and their contribution to your business outcome. Would you agree with that?
That's right. Yeah, that's mostly related to the shortened attribution window. You're not able to see beyond the seven day click through window, right? So yeah. That's okay.
Just to clarify that for folks. So if you saw an incrementality over 100% on Facebook, that would mean that for every transaction or for every conversion that Facebook is reporting, in this case, they're actually missing 0.3 conversions in their reporting because either there's folks that opted out that your ads drove sales for, or as Ranjit said, that the conversion window is so small that there's actually a lot of folks that you're driving 2 weeks after they saw an ad, but Facebook can't track that anymore.
Right. Okay. So what do you do with this insight? Let's go a little bit deep. There are two Facebook prospecting campaigns. So let's say this client, this brand has set a incremental CPA target of $13. Now, with reference to that target CPA value, how is these two campaigns are performing? The first campaign, if you look at the incremental CPA value, it's between $11.7 to $13.2, which is actually hitting the target. So we would recommend in this case you hold a spend. You can keep spending on this campaign. What's really interesting is the second campaign. If you look at the CPA, incremental CPA value, it's between $4.5 to $4.9. It's definitely below your target CPA value. So what we recommend here is you can fund on this campaign. You're not spending a lot on this campaign. If you look at the spend is $637 only. So this is a good opportunity for you to pump your fund on.
Got it. So Ranjit, in this case, you set your target CPM or CPA, excuse me, and we see that the campaign that's actually only a small percentage of spend actually has a lot of room to grow, but the campaign that's taking most of the spend, in this case, the first one, campaign number 4, recommended state of hold because it's generally hovering around that target incremental CPA, right?
That's right.
Cool, thanks.
So, okay, so we talked about Facebook prospecting. Now let's look at a lower funnel tactic. Let's go for Facebook remarketing. And okay, and there is decent contribution from Facebook remarketing. You can see 3.30% of the total transactions are coming from Facebook remarketing. Now look at the incrementality value. With Facebook prospecting, so it's at 136%, but now Facebook remarketing it is on the lower side, 41.61%. What does that mean? It means that if you are looking at the Facebook platform reported data for one transaction, you'll pay $12.51, but actually for incremental conversion from Facebook remarketing, you'll end up paying $30.07. Right, so it's a bit on the costlier side with respect to the target you have set for yourself. Okay, and it's obvious, right? Right. It's on the lower side of the funnel, and you expect high intent on the audience. So even if you see high conversion rate, last touch conversion rate, the audience is anyways going to convert. So there could be it's kind of makes sense to have a lower incrementality there. Now, if you're making let's say the budget adjustments at the campaign level, or you can do that at the ad set level also, right? So I'll take an example where you can you make budget adjustments at the ad set level. So for the remarketing tactic, there are two ad sets. Now, if I look at it with respect to the target that is set $13. Now, let's look at the last touch conversion rate here. The first one is saying that it is 0.15%, and the second ad set is at 0.07%. If you are going with the last touch metric as your tool, as your metric to make decisions on budget, then you will find that the first ad set is performing better. So you may make a budget decision on this one. And maybe because here your goal may be to reduce spend on the ad sets, maybe you'll reduce spend on the second ad set. But if you switch your metrics to incrementality and look at the incremental cost here, the first ad set is between 29.4 to 46.0, and the second one is between 18.7 to 25.3. So on the incremental metric basis, the second ad set outperforms the first one. So if you are going for a gradual reduction on your remarketing ad set, I would recommend that you reduce your spend on this ad set, then reevaluate the results after a week of running this experiment, and then you can make decisions on an ongoing basis.
Amazing. Thanks, Rajat. That really highlights kind of the nuance of last touch. Sometimes not really telling the whole story. And of course, in retargeting or remarketing, you're going to be targeting those folks with a very high propensity to convert. So even though the conversion rates are really high, it's not necessarily due to the media. So this is one case where Facebook might be over-reporting the performance and measuring with the incrementality of a geo test combined with the ad set level test. We can uncover what the true contribution of Facebook is in this case and make better decisions on these particular ad sets. Amazing. Thank you for that demo. Anything else you want to share? Nope.
Good.
Great. All right. I'm going to share my screen and we'll walk through a couple brief examples, and then we're going to take questions. Click here. Okay. So a few client examples that we wanted to walk you guys through. We're going to talk very baseline prospecting example. We're going to dive a little deeper into a retargeting example and show again how going deeper on experimentation as you build your sophistication as an experimentation brand, or a brand who participates in kind of that test and learn culture, what that can really uncover for you over time. And then we're going to go even deeper. If we have time, we'll try and squeeze in a Google PLA shopping example that we think is really, really cool and really exciting. So I'm going to turn it over to Terrence here to just walk us through briefly this first example. Terrence, what's the setup here? What kind of a brand are we talking about? What was the challenge they needed to solve?
Sure. So this example is probably the base case for geo testing. This is the most common type of test we've ran this year for obvious reasons. In this case, it was a direct-to-consumer pet supply company that we worked with prior to iOS being released as well. And we had an idea for what their Facebook prospecting drove, but as mentioned at the top of the call, once iOS launched and tracking was impacted and performance on Facebook was impacted, it was tough to know how much of the conversion loss they were seeing on the platform was due to the opt-out issue and literally just blind spots versus actual performance. So Facebook geotesting essentially allowed us to measure that directly.
Awesome. Great. Thanks. So what ended up just kind of happening with that type of test? What was, and are these kind of common insights that we would tend to see?
So this would be very, very common. So let's say that after iOS released, we saw about, on average, a 40% conversion loss on Facebook Ads Manager. If we are comparing likewise windows, so if we're comparing a 7.1 window to a 7.1 window, we saw about 40% to 50% of the conversions go away. But again, we still want to give Facebook credit for places they're driving sales, but we want to make sure that we're adjudicating them fairly and that we're correctly measuring any other performance loss they might have had. So in this case, we measured exactly that. We took out or held out Facebook prospecting for 1 month from 5 states, and we were able to get to the actual contribution that Facebook is driving. And then easily, once you have that number, you can just translate it back into terms of, what is Facebook actually showing on platform. So the key takeaway here is that the ROAS target that we had our clients tracking towards on platform actually ended up falling by about 40%, meaning that if they were aiming for a $10 ROAS or whatever it is before, they could actually hit now a $6 ROAS and still kind of make up the same amount of sales. Now on platform, you wouldn't see those sales because of those blind spots we mentioned, but we were able to equate, what used to be a $6 ROAS or what used to be a $10 ROAS is now a $6 ROAS, if that makes sense.
Got it. So at the end of the day, you're calibrating the ROAS to better match the loss in tracking that you're experiencing on the platform, right?
Exactly. Correct.
Great. Very cool. All right, we'll jump into our next example. We're going to dive a little deeper now down the funnel. So in this example, we have a women's apparel brand running on Facebook, running retargeting. And the business question is DPA retargeting on Facebook a worthwhile investment? Terrence, before you jump into the challenges here, can you just remind folks what DPA is if anybody here is not familiar?
Yes. So dynamic product advertising on Facebook, almost always in the context of retargeting, is when folks hit your site and then you shortly thereafter serve them a catalog of products that you preloaded to Facebook on Facebook. So it's a very lower funnel retargeting tactic. It tends to look really, really good in last touch attribution and in on-platform attribution. But as I'll walk through right now, that is a pretty big misnomer and easily can misdirect allocation if not accounted for properly.
Great. So what was the challenge here in this particular women's apparel case?
So as I said, DPA retargeting for this brand looked insanely good on platform, just seeing conversion rates that are like off the charts and almost, unbelievable. So they came to us and said, look, we want to validate that this is actually real. If we're going to take this literally, we're going to spend all our budget on this one tactic, and that seems wrong. So that's exactly what we did. We ended up running a geo test for just DPA. We also paired that with a Facebook anchor test that Ron just walked through. And, unsurprisingly to us, what ended up happening is that the incrementality on DPA retargeting was very, very low. So even though the conversion rate was very, very high and they were touching a lot of people that were converting, very few people would have actually, or very few people were driven directly by that ad. They were almost all going to convert anyway. So the question was, okay, well, what do we do about that? Does that mean we shouldn't retarget at all? Or does that mean we should reallocate this budget somewhere else or change the strategy? And that's actually where a second test that we ran kind of came into the fore here. This is why it's really important to have multiple tests running and have different techniques of looking at stuff. The on-site retargeting experiment, which you see us reference here, that is an experiment that we actually use the tags on your site to withhold retargeting advertising from a certain portion of the audience that hits the site. Essentially, we can make a control group. So of 100 people that hit your site, we're going to take 10 people and withhold them from receiving any DPA retargeting whatsoever. We can measure those people conversion behavior versus all the regular people's conversion behavior. We can essentially get to incrementality, and we can also see that over time and in terms of recency from when they hit the site. And in short, the insight here was folks that hit the site within 7 days of converting, or I should rephrase that, folks that they served DPA ads to within 7 days of hitting the site, those ads were just completely redundant. Those folks were going to convert anyway. The DPA ad didn't drive any incremental benefit over doing absolutely nothing. However, if you extended that window further, so 14 days from visiting the site, 21 days, 30 days from visiting the site, you saw a much worse conversion rate because those folks are less interested in buying, obviously, if they're waiting that long. But the incrementality of the ads was actually a lot higher. So even though on surface, those kind of early visiting customers looked to be the really valuable ones to hit, they actually had no value in receiving ads, where the ones further down the line were more incremental and drove a much higher ROAS. So essentially what they did is create exclusions on Facebook to target only those less recently visiting customers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I think it highlights a few points you stated there, which is one, sometimes one test is not enough. And this is why that building that culture of continuously testing is really important, because you run a few tests results may be conclusive, but, or statistically significant, but still misleading in certain ways due to the nature of the test. So sometimes you need to go a little more granular. In this case, the retargeting test, where we're able to split out the audience cohorts into those recency groups and find where the numbers were actually diverging. So really interesting insight there. Thanks, Terrence. I think we have time for our PLA shopping one. I think this is a really, really cool example that we want to walk through really quickly, and then we'll go right to questions. So expanding portfolio tactics in Google PLA shopping. Terrence, I'll cue you up here just with the background. So this is a seasonal apparel brand. Think Christmas sweaters, an item that is typically purchased around a certain type of time of the season or part of the year. In this case, the Q4 season. So this is a very significant core product for this particular brand. They were wondering how should they allocate their PLA spend between their core products and a handful of new products that they are venturing into at this time. So they're at this very tricky moment where it's about to be Q4, and their core product that drives a huge percentage of their revenue, they have a huge amount of money in that PLA shopping tactic. They know it's working to some extent, or they think it's working to some extent because they're seeing the conversions come through, but they're wondering, can I boost my sales in Q4 by potentially reallocating that budget elsewhere? So Terrence, do you want to walk us through a little bit of just kind of how that played out?
Absolutely. So this is a similar example to the last one we went through, but as opposed to splitting or testing by customer type, we're actually testing by product category here. And the reason why this is important was the same reason as the prior example. This brand was very entrenched in one particular product category. They saw crazy performance on platform, on site, but they'd kind of hit a saturation point. We're looking to go into other categories, but lo and behold, those sales were a lot harder to get. They weren't known for those things. Folks weren't coming to them to shop for those things. They had to essentially tell folks that they, to Clay's example, if this is a holiday sweater company, they had to tell people that they sold t-shirts too. So what do we do here? We essentially tested PLA shopping on Google, splitting out those core products from all the other, let's call them expansion products. Think about a 3-cell test here. We're taking 5 states and only serving PLA shopping for the core products. We're taking 5 states and only serving PLAs for the expansion products, and 5 states where we're showing neither. That's just serving as a baseline control. And what we found was pretty interesting. So although their core category showed much better performance, I mean, obviously that's like what they're known for, and you'd expect sales and volume to be better. They were almost 0% incremental. So people know that this was a holiday sweater company and they were already going there to shop. They were not being driven by those Google PLA ads at all. What we actually found in the holdout group is when you didn't serve Google PLA to these folks, they were just going directly to site or converting via SEO or converting through an affiliate site anyway. And having the PLAs up on Google actually did nothing. However, the expansion product audience did see a pretty significant lift. Now, even though total volume was worse and total conversion rate was worse, because again, they're not known for these products, the sales that they actually did drive through Google were incremental. So they were driving volume via those PLA ads where they weren't for the core group. Which is an interesting takeaway. They ended up reallocating their budget based on this and really didn't lose, again, as the test predicted, really didn't lose any impact in their core product for Q4, but were able to drive a lot more sales in the places that were less known.
It's so interesting because this is one of those situations where you almost have to go counterintuitively to everything your gut might be telling you, which is it's Q4, I need to spend on our core product, I need to make sure it succeeds. And instead, through, causality-based experimentation using Geo Match-Market, we can identify that actually you're good there. Those sales are going to come through anyway, and you can reallocate a huge amount of budget in this case to your other product lines. So I think that's just a really cool example of kind of the importance of questioning your standard business practices on a regular basis as a brand. Awesome. Thanks, Terrence, for walking us through that. We are now going into our question section. We have a few answered already. I'm not sure if everybody can see all the answered questions that have been previously asked, so maybe we'll run through a couple of those. But first, we do have one open question. Terrence or Ranjit, I think this might be good for you guys. Thanks for the webinar. If we wanted to try one of these tests ourselves on Facebook, any suggestions on how to find the holdout geos and then how to measure the results from the holdout geos? And I think the other question, there was a previous question that's related to this, which is how do you select the holdout geos in particular, and can you even do this on Facebook itself?
Yeah, I can walk through this quickly. So the key here is that you're not actually using Facebook sales or Facebook track conversions to get to these states. You're using your source of truth transactions. And the goal is to find states that are very representative of the overall business. And by representative, I mean statistically correlated. So if you were to take a time series going in the past between Oklahoma and your national sales, those two things are very, very tightly correlated over time. That's a good state to use for a holdout because it's representative of the whole. Now, the added wrinkle there is you don't want to choose the largest states or the highest volume states in across the nation, because we're going to be holding media out of these. So like you wouldn't want to hold out media from California or New York for a month. That would be very disruptive to the business, and probably you wouldn't get a lot of love internally from doing that. So you want to balance representativeness with size. So you want to pick the smallest states that are still representative of the overall nation, and that's how we select. And then in terms of doing the read, essentially you run the same regression that you use to get to those states, to run a prediction for what would have happened in those states had we done nothing, had we not treated them in any way. And then you essentially compare them to what actually did happen. What actually did happen when we held out Facebook, what actually did happen when we held out Google search. And the difference between those two things is the contribution.
Great. And in terms of being able to run the test, on Facebook, is that something that somebody would be able to actually do themselves, or how is this, in terms of the actual nature of being able to run a test? Can you talk a little bit about that?
The running of the test itself can vary widely on the complexity. If you are just running a simple holdout, it's as simple as adding 5 cells to an exclusion list to all the campaigns you're running and calling it a day. But you can go as complex as you want in terms of, this is a 5-cell test where we're serving certain types of people, certain types of ads, certain types of products. It can get unwieldy pretty quickly, which is why, a lot of folks lean on us to do this for them. But yeah, functionally, it's not exactly rocket science. It's adding smart exclusions to campaigns in a well-designed way, and then again, applying some analytical rigor on the back end to get results.
Great. Another question we had is, how easy is it to parse out the results from something like the PLA test, where you use the geos to determine if core products are actually benefiting? Terrence, is that another one for you? Or
yeah, I'm not exactly sure what this question means, but I think it's about kind of, again, the analytical piece or the back end piece. So if we're using geos to determine where products are actually benefiting, I just want to make a nuanced point here. We're not actually like finding which products work better in. We are taking geos that are representative of the overall and saying, okay, if we don't spend on this type of product, this is a representation of the whole nation, what would happen, and then vice versa for the other product. So parsing out the results is as simple as, did we see a meaningful lift or a meaningful change in conversions, top line conversions, like your source of truth transactions? Did we see a meaningful difference between cell A and cell B? If they ended up at about the same level from where we would have predicted, then we kind of be like, either there was no impact, or maybe it's not statistically significant. Maybe we should test again later, or maybe there just wasn't enough volume on either to get to a good result. But if we see a meaningful difference in your source of truth transactions between those two cells, okay, we know that there's an actual effect here between these two products, and we can attribute it to the product because we haven't changed anything else between those two cells besides which products we're showing.
Right, because you're basically looking at your source of truth data and you're saying, let me look only at the transactions from this particular geo to highlight the nuance of the holdout and see what the difference is.
Yeah, as a generalization, the how easy part of this question, kind of the bigger thing you're testing, the more statistical significance, the easier it gets. If you start to cut cells down to really, really complex, really like minute details and differences, it gets harder and harder, but it can also be more useful and interesting, I guess I should say.
Great. I'm going to jump back really quickly through some of the answered ones, just in case people, I'm not sure if they have access to see these, but I saw a couple interesting ones in here that I think are cool. Let me see. Ian asked, you mentioned that as a rule of thumb, you should be spending at least 10K a month on paid media to run these types of tests. Is the 10K figure anchored on an assumed average conversion volume? If so, what is that? So is there a relationship between the spend volume and the conversion volume? I guess, can you kind of, massage those a little bit depending on the needs of the brand or the test?
Yeah, so this is something that we would take on a case-by-case basis. That's very much just a benchmark. The reason being, it's going to depend a lot on the product category you're in. If you're selling socks or something that's like a quick turnaround disposable impulse purchase, it's very easy to dial up the amount of conversions you need to do a geo test with a very relatively low amount of spend. And the opposite would be true if you're selling exercise equipment or a mattress or something where even if you have a lot of conversions, they happen on a slow sales cycle, so that you're not even really able to track them all that well. We would just generally kind of like, let's say we're in the sales process with someone, we would just look at the types of volumes we're seeing and make a call on whether we think they're appropriate for this. But yeah, that's pretty much just a benchmark. It's not a hard set rule.
Great. We've got another question from Ian, but first I'm going to jump to this one, which I think is important. Judita asked, what do you mean by anchor creative? Apologies if we brushed over that too quickly. So when we run our Facebook split tests, we have dubbed one of the control creatives the anchor creative, which essentially, instead of, it's challenging on Facebook to have an absence of media because the PSA is no longer a valid form of testing. We don't have a meaningful way of not showing someone media on Facebook in a way that we can measure effectively. So instead, we've basically done some testing and found that certain types of creatives make for a really good baseline comparative basis if you do enough in the actual test itself. We call that particular creative an anchor creative. Typically, it's just a high level brand placard or brand creative that's not doesn't have a particular CTA or a particular product on it, and we can use that as the baseline to compare other campaigns to. But again, remember, we're comparing that entire test of those ad sets against the incrementality insights found at from the geo test for the kind of Facebook tactic level. But hopefully that answers the question on what the anchor creative is. I'm going to jump right back to the open questions. Ian asked, how would you handle a case when sales only occur in a couple DMAs?
Yeah. So this is a pretty common occurrence, sales concentration at the DMA level. We would design exactly the same test, except instead of using states, we would use DMAs. That's the short answer. If sales are so concentrated that, in one or two DMAs and nowhere else, then it would be pretty hard to run a test like this, but that usually is not the case. Usually the case is something like a regional brand or something like that doesn't have a lot of coverage. We still usually have enough DMAs to work with to run holdout tests.
Awesome.
And we can go as granular as city or even zip code.
And as you get more granular, is it true that you would need a higher volume of data to test with? So if you're a really high volume brand, then you can, look more granularly at your geos from which you can pick.
You would need a higher volume of geos, but they would represent the same volume of sales. Like, let's say 5% of overall sales. That might be 2 states, but that might be 20 zip codes. Right. It would still be 5% of overall sales. Got
it. Makes sense. Cool. I think we've got time for a couple more in here. Let me see. Oh, a few more questions in the open. Let's see. Would you recommend running a test for a longer period of time if we're limited to smaller DMA or spend levels? Can you talk about the length of the test? Ranjit, you actually mentioned earlier the 30-day period for the geo test is typical. Do you want to talk about kind of where that lives and why that's the case? Or Terrence, either of you guys?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Just the short answer is that's kind of where the pre-analytics that go into test design, that's exactly what they address. We would essentially look at what level of spend we're talking about, what level of conversions we're talking about, and exactly how concentrated those sales are, and try and figure out, I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. It's a pretty simple statistical formula of like what is required to actually get a meaningful contribution or a meaningful lift that we'd be able to read. So it would completely depend on the situation, but we can easily plug those numbers into a formula and figure out what you need to do to get to a statistically significant read, or more appropriate way of saying it is a reliable or valid read.
Makes sense. Yeah, and there's certainly some art blended in with the science in terms of selection, market selection, and there's a internally here, just for folks who are curious, we have a pretty stringent feasibility process that we go through to identify the feasibility of a particular geo, to analyze whether our predictions are accurate enough for us to forecast against. So we use a few different variants and bias controls to make sure that when we're running these prediction, it falls within a certain threshold of accuracy to ensure, that the test can be conclusive. And, frankly, we have brands spending lots of money on against these decisions. So it's really important that the data that they're pulling from is valid.
Yeah, and to actually that point, the one use case for testing a longer period of time, more so than volume, is actually sales cycle. So in the past, and I'll be vague to not name them, but let's say we've worked with like an expensive lifestyle equipment company where folks take a lot of time to actually decide whether they want to pull the trigger or not. That's where longer term geotesting is really useful. Because if you just ran it for 30 days, you might not actually soak up a lot of the impact from the things you're testing. But if you test for 60 and 90 days, you almost certainly will. That's probably the most common use case for extending the window.
Great. Ian, firing off a few more here. We've got, is zip code targeting not super accurate? And then especially when the user is not sharing their location data.
Depends on the platform. So remember that your source of truth data, let's say we're talking about, e-commerce or retail, that will be pretty accurate by zip. The problem is targeting by zip. Let's say we're doing a holdout and we put some zip exclusions into the platform to not spend there. Stuff like Facebook is very accurate. Other platforms, less accurate. Probably falls on a spectrum, but that's info you can get pretty easily from the platforms themselves. I can tell you that from personal experience, we have not had an issue doing this on Facebook or Google, but I would feel like there's probably more risk of contamination on other less established platforms. But generally speaking, we've done it and had good success.
Awesome. I think we just ended at time. I don't think we have any other questions rolling in. I wanted to thank everybody who joined today to participate with us. Really appreciate the questions and participation. If you have further questions, definitely reach out. We all are available, at any other time to answer your emails or your questions. This was recorded. I believe we'll be posting it on the site, and I believe we'll be sending out an email follow-up shortly with additional info. So thank you everybody for joining. Terrence, Ranjith, great to see you guys. And we look forward to seeing everybody on the next monthly Insights session.
Thank you, Clay, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you soon.
See you later.